I think it's the toughest sport in the world because you're dealing with a lot of emotions. You're basically competing in the most primal thing you can do
Yeah,
as a human, right? Is to be able to fight. And when you lose a fight, it's not like you lose a running race.
right.
Like I lost, there's a lot more to it. Something that goes a bit deeper there. And I think anyone who's a professional fighter to some degree of that level is a different kind of human upstairs mentally to want to do that as a full-time job.
All right, all right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Stronger Weekly, brought to you by Purist Nutrition. I'm your host, Jesse Karajat. Thank you so much for being here. We've got an awesome guest lined up this week on the show. I'm so stoked about it. I've never focused on or really did a deep dive on combat sports. Some call it MMA. And I've got a guest, Coach Steve Sahyoun, coming to us from Brisbane, Australia. And I just had an awesome conversation with him about his world of combat sports and training and preparation and rehab. And I think importantly for the listener here, how do we take some of those training methodologies and those qualities and those focuses and apply them to ourselves, right? Like common people who want to be fit, because there's so many attributes in the world of combat sports, or should I say so many focus areas and qualities that they look at that we neglect, and they're important. He talks about, these 6 qualities, right? One of them is elasticity. Have you ever heard that word in the fitness context, right? Like, what does that mean? He talks about force development, maximal strength, relative strength, mobility. And what I love about Coach Steve is, while he's training combat athletes, his whole focus and priority is, how do you set these athletes up? And in my case, how do you set like common guys like me up so that we're not just healthy now and performing now, we are healthy later in life. He focuses on health span. How do we want to feel when we have to bend over at 55 years old and pick something up off the floor? How do we want to feel when we're carrying groceries in the house and trying to be independent when we're 75? And some of his principles really talk about like our tendons and ligaments. And it's not just what most people focus on, which is strength resistance training, right? Or hypertrophy training. So hang on for the back end of the episode for that interview. But as always, as we do every week, we want to curate the most important health and fitness headlines that happened this past week. And we're going to dive right in to this week's health and fitness headlines. Let's jump in. Your first health and fitness headline of the week. Big news on health insurance this week out of Capitol Hill. Even though the government shutdown has ended, Congress still hasn't resolved whether the Affordable Care Act subsidies will be extended for 2025, leaving about 22 million Americans in limbo. These subsidies have kept monthly premiums affordable for some folks since 2021, but they expire at year's end unless Congress acts. So folks, here's the simplest way to kind of understand it. Right now, the federal government covers a big portion of ACA premiums. And without that support, many people will see their monthly costs double and even triple if that's where they get their health insurance. NPR profiled one woman from Missouri whose plan currently costs $300 with subsidies, but would jump to $1,250, so $1,250 without them. She told NPR, quote, $1,000 is probably what they being politicians, blow on dinner. For me, that's half my wages. Democrats want multiple year extensions, while many Republicans argue the subsidies were originally meant as a temporary pandemic measure, but say they might consider a 1-year extension for now. The Senate has promised a vote before December 31st, but open enrollment is happening right now, which puts many families in a tough position. So takeaway, if you are someone that's shopping for ACA health insurance coverage, you can browse plans now, but you need to watch the news very closely. Congress could flip a switch and extend these subsidies further, but until they do, millions of households are stuck waiting to find out what they'll actually pay starting January 1st. Next up, a major new analysis is shaking up the obesity drug conversation. So Reinsurance Group of America, that's RGA, just released a massive report examining GLP-1 medications, drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Zepbound, and concluded that widespread adoption could meaningfully reduce national mortality rates over the next 20 years. That's the headline there, folks. These drugs do not just help with weight loss. They have a very, very serious chance at a population level that they could save thousands, if not millions of lives. So the RGA analysis showed that for nearly every health scenario modeled, the introduction of GLP-1s led to lower long-term death rates, driven by reduced diabetes, fewer cardiovascular events, and improved metabolic markers. As the report puts it, quote, at the general population level, AOMs will have a meaningful impact on mortality, end quote. This comes just 1 week after the Trump administration announced deals with Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk to dramatically lower the costs for these drugs, including $149 monthly tablets and $50 Medicare copays by 2026. So significant price drops for these medications. If access expands, the health impact could truly be enormous. So takeaway, GLP-1s aren't magic. They're not for everybody. Things like diet, movement, and strength training still matter. But the evidence is clear. These medications will reshape public health, and with prices coming down, far more Americans will soon have access. So lots to be excited about. Your next health and fitness headline is my weekly shot at alcohol, sort of, and pun intended. The non-alcoholic beverage market is exploding. Forbes reports that investors are pouring millions into zero-proof brands as consumer behavior shifts away from heavy drinking, especially amongst younger adults. So here's the scale of it. The NA beverage category has grown more than 31% in just year over year, now generating over $500 million annually in the United States alone. And according to Gallup, only 62% of adults now regularly drink alcohol, the lowest level in 2 decades. Among Gen Z, alcohol use has dropped by almost 20%. And the trend is not random, folks. It reflects health data. So alcohol is linked to 7 types of cancer. That's right. It's a carcinogenic, is responsible for roughly 178,000 U.S. deaths each year and remains the leading cause of preventable mortality for people ages 20 to 49. So the more and more studies come out, the more and more science comes out, the less and less people are drinking, provided that they actually get access to that information. So as Forbes highlighted, investors see NA beverages as, quote, a long-term cultural shift, not just a fad. So if you're cutting back on alcohol, whether for sober October, dry January, whatever you want to call it, you are not alone. Millions are doing it and swapping booze for better sleep, improved mental health, and zero-proof alternatives that let them keep the ritual without the risk. Next up, a new study ties ultra-processed foods to higher cancer risk. So a study published in The Lancet Regional Health Europe found that high consumption of ultra-processed foods, known as UPFs, is associated with an increased risk of several cancers, including colorectal, breast, and pancreatic cancers. So researchers reviewed dietary data from hundreds of thousands of adults, finding that those who consumed the most UPFs had a 9 to 15% higher risk of developing certain cancers compared to those who ate the least amount. As one researcher noted, quote, ultra-processed foods appear to drive chronic inflammation and metabolic dysfunction, 2 pathways strongly linked to cancer, end quote. And this isn't the first time this has showed up in a study. So UPFs have previously been tied to higher rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and even depression. Common culprits include packaged snacks, sugary cereals, frozen meals, processed meats, fast food, and most shelf-stable baked goods, meaning baked goods that have a long shelf life because of all the artificial things that are in it. So, takeaway, if you do consume these UPFs, you don't have to be perfect. Just aim to reduce the amount of consumption and replace UPFs with whole foods, lean proteins, fruits, vegetables, beans, minimally processed grains. Small changes make huge impact over time. And your last health and fitness headline has to do with chatbots that are spreading misinformation around mental health. So, a big advisory from the American Psychological Association. The APA issued a national warning about mental health chatbots and wellness apps, saying that they often provide, quote, inaccurate, unsafe, or misleading advice to people who are using the technology to help with their mental health. So here's the scope. More than 1 in 3 Americans, per the report, now report turning to AI-based tools for support with things like anxiety, depression, or stress, largely because they're cheaper, accessible, always available, and do not require insurance. The APA warns that many of these tools use untested algorithms, lack clinical oversight, and frequently provide guidance that contradicts established mental health standards. The advisory stated, quote, consumers may not realize when they are receiving advice that is potentially harmful or simply incorrect. Studies have found that some chatbots give contradictory medication guidance, fail to recognize suicidal language, or encourage unhealthy coping behaviors. So takeaway, technology can support your well-being, but it shouldn't replace licensed care, especially when needed. If you're struggling, talk to a real professional and be cautious about apps that promise fast fixes with no credentials behind them. I think I covered a story about a month ago. It was devastating. There was three youths who actually wind up taking their own lives. And in hindsight, when these parents and investigators looked into it, they were being groomed and guided by ChatGPT. Just horrifying testimony on Capitol Hill. I watched all of it, and it just really opened my eyes to the dangers of this AI technology. So if you're a parent, please monitor your children's use of things like chatbots or AI. Just monitor and just ask them, what are you engaging it for? What are you talking about? If you are someone who's struggling with mental health issues, please seek professional guidance if it's available to you. There's lots of great online resources these days where you can get that care that you need, but just be very, very careful if you're engaging with AI to get the healthcare that truly should be delivered from a professional. So that's it for your health and fitness headlines this week. Just a quick word from our new sponsor, Purist Nutrition. And then I'll have MMA coach Steven Sahyoun on the other side. We'll see you there. All right, let's be honest. You're probably not a professional athlete with a personal chef and unlimited recovery time. If you're like me, you're hitting the gym at 5 a.m. before work or squeezing in training between meetings, just trying to stay consistent while life keeps throwing you curveballs. That's exactly who Purist Nutrition was made for. Purist keeps it simple. NSF-certified supplements with minimal, clean ingredients that actually taste good. No artificial ingredients and no proprietary blends where you're guessing what you're taking. Just premium actives like Creapure, the purest creatine on the planet, whey isolate protein that is US sourced and easy on the stomach, and hydration that keeps you going without all the extra sugar or sodium. Whether you're a parent juggling kids and training, or just someone who refuses to compromise on quality, Purist Nutrition fits your routine. Built for tomorrow, science-backed, tested and trusted by athletes, and most importantly, effective. Visit puristnutrition.com to see the full lineup of quality supplements. That's puristnutrition.com, because your nutrition should work as hard as you do. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. I'm here with this week's guest, elite combat sports strength and rehab coach, Coach Steven Sahyoun. What's up, Steve?
I'm well, mate. How are you? I've just finished an MMA session, so I'm pretty fried at the moment. Hopefully you get some good information out of me in this session.
That's my plan and my job, to drag that good information out of you. So what I love about the message that you put out there is that you're not, even though you're in the combat sports world, you're not just about building athletes. You're building like athletes for life, right? Some of the principles that you have an expertise in, things like explosiveness, mobility, endurance, right? I think these are some of the aspects that the everyday man or woman who wants to be fit can often neglect. I would love to draw out some tips and suggestions for people to start using your principles in their everyday life, even if they're not going to pursue combat sports.
I've been working in strength, rehab, and performance, whatever you want to call it, for the last 15 years. I started off as a personal trainer out of a commercial gym. I fell in love with CrossFit before I became a personal trainer. During my time working out of a commercial gym, I started training a friend of mine who was in combat sports. He was a professional MMA fighter, and I started getting a feel for the sport by, just starting to wrestle with a mate of mine, got into some boxing, and then I started sparring, and I fell in love with combat sports. But I was always in the industry of working with improving people's relative strength, making people healthy, getting them to move better, perform better for life. So once I started to develop a passion for combat sports, I got injured. And when I got injured, I then was in a world of depression about, not being able to do the thing that I love doing. It affected my work. I lost a lot of income considering that I was walking on the gym floor, walking around the gym floor and servicing clients. I had to hobble around on crutches and try and do my job in a busy commercial gym in Sydney CBD of Australia. And from that time when I got injured and I ruptured my Achilles tendon, it kind of gave me a bit of a passion and a spark for rehab. Let's say early stage rehabilitation was really frustrating. And being a coach, no one had a clear plan or outline on how to rehab an Achilles tendon. And I had worked with a number of physios, a number of S&C coaches, and no one had clear KPIs. No one had a clear roadmap of, what early, mid to late stage rehab would look like. So I developed a passion for rehab and I started to learn a lot. And I started to learn more about the human body. I started to look at biomechanics. I started to look more into the rehab world of understanding passive treatment and why it doesn't work versus an active plan. And currently now I work with professional MMA athletes to grapplers, some UFC athletes, all the way right down to your hobbyist like myself, who's a 40-year-old man who's taken up the sport later in life and has a heap of injuries and just wants to stay active.
Let's talk about how you approach an athlete. So a new athlete with aspirations to compete at a high level in combat sports, they come to you, they've got some skills, but they want to improve their strength, conditioning, mobility. They want to bulletproof their body. Walk me through the process, your first conversations with them, assessing the athlete, and then building your protocols based on their goals. What does that look like?
Yeah, so first thing I always try to identify, and this is something in mentoring, well, I've started mentoring a lot of other coaches now, is getting a clear understanding of your role as a physical performance coach or S&C coach. In combat sports, it varies from a lot of other sports. However, with sound principles, they apply across many sports and many things that you do in life. So, for example, the first thing you need to understand is your role as an S&C coach is to improve the hardware to support the software. The software is a skill, that is the technical, tactical element that the athlete wants to get better at, which is them doing their sport. Specificity lies in the software. Hardware is a general approach to improving physical qualities and outputs. So when you look at an athlete coming into the weight room or booking in for a consultation, my job is to already have a really good understanding of the characteristics of their sport, right? So understanding the software, and then I also need to understand the hardware. What physical attributes does this athlete possess? And what are the key priorities that this athlete needs to focus on with their physical preparation? And the only way you can find that out is through testing. So an athlete comes into the gym, we obviously have a good conversation. I get to know the athlete, talk about their lifestyle, how many days a week they're sparring, looking at their schedule, looking at their mood. And then I take them through a general movement screen to identify what exercise selection is going to be best for them. Then I take them through performance testing, which is going to give me some insight into the priorities of where their programming is going to be steered and what physical qualities need to be a main focus early on in their training. And then that's how we kind of shape a program around those two things. So we look at the time constraints of the skill, which is the software, and then we look at what are the athlete's needs, and then we design a plan around those two things to give an athlete a really structured plan that they can stick to and kind of auto-regulate their week and their training load based on how they're feeling.
That's great. Now, question for you. I know you were involved in Corey Sandhagen's fight camp for Umar Nurmagomedov, right? So I hear you in that you're assessing the athlete. You're looking at, the software and the skills as their fighting abilities. But where does, when you're involved in a fight camp, like you were for the Sandman, Corey Sandhagen here in Colorado, where does their opponent's skill set come into your game plan on the hardware side of the house? Because with Umar, high pace, lots of takedown defense, sprawling, I'm assuming, high output. Do you then tailor an opponent when you have like a specific fight camp that you're preparing for?
That's a really good question. No one's ever asked me that question before, but that's how I would think about it. Now, with any good coaching relationship, when you look at the sport of MMA, there's many moving parts. You're talking about a chaotic sport that is extremely unpredictable. So you might improve someone's general physical outputs, whether that's strength, rate of force development, relative strength, mobility, and that may have a positive transfer, but they may still lose the fight. So therefore,
Right.
it's not always a guarantee. So if you're looking like, let's say, for example, you are a sprint coach, and I think about we spoke about this before. You have a sprint coach, and this is important that I give this example so people can understand the overlap that a sprint coach has with software and hardware. So software being the skill, the sprint coach gets to coach the sprinter through the skill and see the way that they're actually executing their craft. Their craft is to run faster in 100 meters. Let's say they're a 100-meter sprinter. The work that they do in the weight room is to support the athlete to run faster. So they want to build a bigger engine in the weight room so that this athlete can, put that power to the floor and run fast, right? So they're going to get instant feedback knowing whether their inputs created a positive adaptation towards a skill, simply because if they ran faster and they got a better time in the 100 meters, or they got a better, accel from 0 to 30 meters or whatever it may be that they're working on, you know that those inputs had a positive effect. Now, with combat
Mhm.
sports, we don't always know that. So this is where communication comes in. Because I'm not a skills coach, I had to develop a relationship with Trevor Whitman while I was there, who's a
Mm.
lovely guy who's extremely intelligent when it comes to the technical aspect of fighting. Very smart guy. And the conversations that we had were around, I was looking at Corey from a human first. I was looking at him and I was like, okay, these are these are things that I look at when I train an athlete. Are they more of a narrow build or are they more of a wider individual? So
Yeah.
they're going to produce force differently and they're going to have more biases towards certain fight strategies. So if you look at Corey Sandhagen, he's a lot more elastic in nature. So what we would say is he's really good on the feet. He has a really good way of closing the distance and fighting at range. But when it comes to him, gritting down and, if you look at him versus Marab in that situation, Marab is a
Yeah.
wider individual. He's more of a powerhouse, you know what I mean? And he's very explosive. Where
Compact.
Corey's compact, yeah. Where you look at Corey, he's very rangy, uses his range. Two different, makeups. You're never going to make Corey Sandhagen a Marab. He's just not
Yep.
built like that. So you've got to kind of look at and go, okay, with Umar in this situation, there was a lot of wrestling defense, and it was all about where he positioned his body to be able to make himself heavy to be able to defend a takedown. So a lot of that came down to the technical aspect. And the conversations that I had with Trevor were, what are some of the positions that he can't get into that he's really struggling with to be able to defend these takedowns? Is it a lack, or is it a hardware issue, or is it a software issue?
Mm.
And just generally speaking, based on his structure, he was very compressed in certain areas where he wasn't really good at hinging and sitting back into his hips. So
Mm.
being able to sit back into your hips and get a lot of length in the posterior part of your hip, or the lateral part of the glute, was something that we had been working on. Now, the information that I got wasn't really helpful because I don't expect Trevor to understand human movement and biomechanics. I expect Trevor to understand fighting and then me to look at the human movement and biomechanics of where the positions that he needs to get into. Now, the issue is that the weight room doesn't need to be specific to the skill because you will never replicate the demands of the sport in the weight room. You're better off just doing the sport for that. So I have to then go back and look at Corey as a human first and foremost. Can he flex his hip well? Can he extend his hip well? Can he abduct his hip? Can he adduct his hip? Can he internally and externally rotate his hip well? And how does he hinge? All these things that I look at of a base program or just an athlete in general, this is going to kind of shape the way that you choose exercise selection to kill two birds with one stone. So for Corey, it was always about, we need to improve his maximal strength, but we need to do it in a way that doesn't compress him even further, where he loses his ability to turn. When I say turn, you need to be able to explore movement in the transverse plane, and you need to have a lot of external rotation available to you when you are doing combat sports, because you need it to move. But you also need to be compact and really fast in certain situations, whether that's defending a takedown in this situation. And you need to have the range of motion to be able to do that, which Corey does to a certain degree. Now, years of fighting, you're going to develop compensatory strategies to what you're good at and how your body moves. So because there's a lot of chaos and there's a lot of stuff to look at, and you can get really deep in the weeds of this, and you can start looking at every little minute detail, which is what I did, trying to justify the reasoning behind everything that I did. And I think that's important to grow as a coach. But what you've got to realize is that because there's a disconnect between the transfer to the skill, communication is going to yield the greatest outcomes. So having a conversation with Corey, the athlete, who's a human first and foremost, hey, Corey, how do you feel sparring? Steve, I feel great, man. I noticed that my kicks were way higher. I felt way more explosive. I felt stronger when I was, in a body lock position, when I had to pummel, when I had to create distance. I felt really strong. My neck didn't hurt. Fantastic. That's positive transfer. What we're doing is working. He's feeling good. So that's kind of all you can really go off. Yes, your metrics in the gym you're going to track, whether that's a counter movement jump, your RSI, whether that's your maximal strength, your relative strength testing, whatever you have as a base set rule of, methods that you use in order to track performance that kind of dictate how you design training. That's all relative. But at the end of the day, if you're not managing fatigue and you're not communicating with your athlete, it doesn't matter what numbers they put out, because at the end of the day, there's still a human first and foremost, and your job, your role, especially during fight camp, is to mitigate fatigue, and the skill takes priority as your physical qualities and your role as an S&C coach takes a back step, and your job is just to get the athlete to the fight in one piece as healthy as possible, maintaining the qualities that you've been working on.
On that note, Steven, just this note of fatigue, and I'll say like the chaos of a fight. I was watching one of my favorite fighters, probably my favorite fighter is Khalil Roundtree.
I like him too. He's very explosive.
Very explosive, fast twitch muscle, fundamentally sound. He just fought Jiri Prochazka. And I was picturing, I was so devastated for that loss because for 2 rounds, he was sharp, tight, outskilling him, right? And then in the 3rd round, it just came down to essentially endurance and grit and chaos. And that's what Jiri brings to most fights. And as a coach, I can just picture this, and I'd love to hear if you have any examples. Like, I'm sure there's been times when the training was on point, the hardware and the software was on point. They get in there and then just a random left hook or a random punch or just something out of the blue just ends the fight and resets it. And as a coach, that must be, and as an athlete too, if I'm one of these fighters, that must be one of the most probably discouraging things you can experience.
I think it's the toughest sport in the world because you're dealing with a lot of emotions with you're basically competing in the most primal thing you can do
Yeah.
as a human, right? Is to be able to fight. And when you lose a fight, it's not like you lose a running race. It's
Right.
like I lost. There's a lot more to it. Something that goes a bit deeper there. And I think anyone who's a professional fighter to some degree of that level is a different kind of human upstairs mentally to want to do that as a full-time job.
Look, if you're like me, you enjoy a drink every now and then, a glass of wine with dinner, a cold beer after a long week, maybe even a night out with friends, but you want to stay in control. That's why I'm excited about Clutch, the newest innovation from Or Health. Clutch is a fast-acting naltrexone mint you take before you drink. It dissolves quickly, absorbs through your mouth, and starts working fast, helping you curb the cravings without giving up drinking altogether. It's discreet, portable, and designed for real life. The mints come in a sleek, pocket-sized case that goes wherever you go. If you've been trying to moderate or simply drink smarter, this is the tool that you need. To get started, text STRENGTH to 710-710. That's STRENGTH to 710-710. Answer a few quick questions, and your Clutch will be shipped directly to your door. No more hangovers, no more guilt, just the control you need in the palm of your hand. Bulletproof your drinking with Clutch now. Let's just say you're coming out of an assessment. There's different areas that you want to work on. What would be those categories? I heard raw strength before. What else is there?
Okay. What you mentioned was physical qualities, and I think any decent program has a focus on elastic qualities. They have a focus on maximal strength. They have a focus on relative strength. They have a focus on rate of force development. They have a focus on some form of mobility and a focus on energy system development. So if you're looking at that as the rule of thumb, though those physical qualities, anyone from any sport would be touching on those physical qualities throughout the year. So even
Okay.
whether you're a, competitive athlete versus someone who's just an average Joe like myself,
And me.
you probably want to touch on those physical qualities throughout the session, throughout the year, not only from an athletic standpoint, but also from a general health perspective. And you'll probably see some form of those 6 qualities throughout anyone's strength and conditioning plan.
Okay, so of those 6, though, which of those 6 qualities are the most neglected by the average person?
I would personally say elastic qualities and rate of force development. If you look at, well, what exercises improve rate of force development and what exercises work on elastic qualities? So jumping works on elastic qualities, plyometrics. You could do some light ballistics with throwing. You could do some barbell bench throws. You could do plyometric push-ups. There are a lot of exercises that you can do that focus on recoupling energy really fast, that focus on store and release of energy at high velocities and the elastic properties of the tendon, right?
Mm.
So if we want to look at developing a well-rounded plan, there should be some form of jumping in there and some form of jumping that focuses on recoupling energy really fast with short ground contact times so that we can utilize the stretch shortening cycle really fast and work on those elastic properties. Now, if we look at rate of force development, a perfect example of that would be Olympic lifting or using derivatives or loaded jumps or, moving submaximal loads at really high velocity. Now, to train those 2 physical qualities, they're not very common in a general program. They're stuff that they're more obviously focused in towards athletic development to improve physical qualities like power and rate of force development, which is what they need due to the time constraints of their sport. They need to be fast, they need to be explosive, they need to be able to produce force in a short amount of time. So they're probably the 2 qualities that I think are the most lacking as we age and in general health and performance. And they're qualities that I think are probably going to be the most important as you get older. We start becoming more sedentary, we take on responsibility, we have kids, we work a lot. You
Yep.
lose the playful side, right? And as you get older, obviously, tendon compliance isn't so, thankful as it was in your youth, right? So
Yeah.
you've got to look at, okay, if this is one of the main physical qualities that is lacking as we age, and the reason is it needs to be trained weekly because it's the first quality to diminish. It's not like strength.
Mm,
So we need to
right.
touch on some form of jumping and rate of force development work, or whatever quality that you want to improve power output. You need to touch on those ones that require frequency, more frequency than others.
Would I be correct to
Excuse me.
say if I want to take that advice on the elastic quality, instead of maybe on, say, leg day, lower day, instead of doing that fourth like resistance training move, which might be like a walking lunge, if my time is limited, I can get rid of that and do sets of weighted box jumps.
Yeah, I would probably think about it like this. The qualities that we spoke about require a high degree of neuromuscular efficiency. And
Hmm.
if you want to get adaptation to tissue and to drive adaptation, you'd probably want to do it when you're fresh. And you probably want to
Ah.
jump before you go into those sessions so that we can really get high outputs to get adaptation. So
Mm.
if we want to talk about, there's many ways to do that. You can potentiate it. You could do a contrast set. There are many ways to do that. Now, if you're new to jumping, you probably want to learn how to jump first, and you want to prioritize that at the start of your session. Works really good after your warm up, when you're fresh, so that you can milk it and you can really, get every little bit of juice out of that quality. I would recommend, if you are looking to add in some form of jumping and some light ballistic work, you do it twice a week. You start with a bilateral variation first. Obviously, jumping
Hmm.
off one leg's harder than jumping off two legs. You get competent in starting with extensive work where you're focusing on shorter ground contact times with higher volume, less intense variations that allow the tissue to adapt, especially your foot, your Achilles, your calves, your lower limbs, to adapt to repetitive contacts and building up volume and frequency with that before you start layering in more intense variations.
That's awesome. Let's talk about the rate of force piece. Now you mentioned um, Olympic lifts is one such way. I'm guessing that's something like kettlebell cleans, something where you're just moving weight fast. If I wanted to say work on that ability or that quality, excuse me, twice a week, could I say, like, let's just say on a pull day where I would normally do things like pull-ups and dumbbell rows, would I start the workout with maybe a power clean, like a barbell power clean, for example, before I go into the hypertrophy workout? Is that the same concept?
Pretty much. You want to start with the highest priority first. So it's the most neurologically demanding, because I'll tell you why. You are trying to move that bar as fast as possible with the maximal amount of intent. So intent drives adaptation. So when it comes to velocity based training, or you're looking at, just moving weights really fast, you're always going to be working at a 10 RPE. RPE is non-existent in VBT, because you're
Mm.
always the goal is to work as hard as far and as fast as possible. And I would recommend that if you're doing, you know, if your goal is to improve rate of force development and you're trying to work on those qualities, it might be worth tracking velocity to also measure readiness, but then also measure, you know, is your velocity actually tracking upwards? And it also helps to guide your decision on the load that you use as well. Now, do you need to be an elite level athlete to track metrics? No. Do you need to track all these metrics? No. But if you want to get a little bit more specific into what you need and to have a bit more direction with your training, I think having a base level understanding of just tracking, bar velocity or peak power might be worth adding that into your toolbox.
Let's be honest, most of us don't have a private gym, a full-time trainer, or hours every day to lift. If you're like me, you don't even have time to commute to a local gym. You're training early in the morning or carving out 40 minutes between work, kids, and everything else competing for your time. And when fitness matters that much to your well-being and your health, you've got to have home fitness equipment that's as strong and reliable as you are. That is exactly why I use Rep Fitness. Rep is built for people who train with purpose, people who need high-quality, reliable equipment engineered for real strength. Designed right here in Colorado, USA, Rep Fitness provides racks, benches, bars, and plates that offer commercial-grade durability without commercial gym prices. Premium materials, smart engineering, and fair pricing. Whether you're outfitting your very first garage gym or upgrading your current setup to match where you want to go with your training, Rep makes gear that keeps up with your life and your goals. Visit repfitness.com to see their full lineup. Racks, benches, bars, plates, conditioning tools, and everything you need to build a home gym that works as hard as you do. That's repfitness.com. It's finally time to pursue your strength. Very good. And then maybe just if you can give some, well, actually one more question on that. So would you, thinking about maximum strength and relative strength, would you advise that you can and should train both at the same time and just kind of spread that out over the week and that's okay? Or should you focus on one or the other?
So what we do, what we have to do with combat sport athletes or people who are stuck on time is we touch on multiple physical qualities within the session. We just need to identify what the priority is first and foremost. So if an athlete needs to work on maximal strength, we're probably going to start with that. And we're probably going to prioritize that with some jumping. Probably always going to start with velocity-based work first, because it's not going to be too taxing on what you do with your maximal strength. And we're always going to have that there as a non-negotiable. Now, if an athlete needs to work on their maximal strength, it's probably going to be right there after velocity, a velocity work that you do, and it's going to be part of your primary strength block. If your goal was to improve, let's say, your pull-up, right, and you wanted to improve your 1 rep max on a weighted pull-up or whatever it was, with whatever variation that you're doing, you would probably start with that in your session after your velocity work. So if you're doing a upper body push-pull session versus a full body session, there's many ways that you can do that and structure that in your training. So, for example, with a full body session, you would probably start with velocity, then you would move into your primary exercises that have a high degree of neuromuscular fatigue and that are really taxing on the central nervous system. And let's say, for example, it's a squat pattern and you are doing a Zercher squat in that session, and your goal is to move the weight at 0.5 meters per second at 80% of your 1 rep max for sets of 3 reps, right? You might superset that with a weighted pull-up. And you would probably superset a knee flexion dominant exercise with a weighted pull-up, so they're opposing muscle groups that are not going to interfere with one another. So you could still work on maximal strength at a specific velocity to achieve the adaptation that you want. Might be power development or whatever it is. But if you're working purely on maximal strength and the goal is to lift the heaviest weight possible, regardless of the velocity that you're moving it at, you're probably going to utilize RPE or reps in reserve, right? So let's say, for example, your goal is to lift heavy. You lift a heavy set of Zercher squats. You could rest, say 45 seconds to a minute, go into your weighted pull-ups, work on your relative strength. Then you would rest, say, for 2 to 3 minutes, repeat that for 3 to 4 sets. Whatever your goal is, whatever the volume is, whatever you can tolerate.
Tracking. That's really, go ahead. That's helpful.
And vice versa with a hinge versus a push. So if your goal is a weighted ring dip, you might do a barbell RDL, superset with a weighted ring dip. And you're still chasing maximal strength in a hinge pattern, and you're still chasing relative strength with a dip, a weighted dip.
Love that. So you're supersetting opposing muscle groups with different goals, strength on one
Yes.
side and relative strength on the other. I love
It's
that.
just it's just so that if you're someone who's constrained for time, it will always dictate the way that you design training.
Yeah.
So if you train twice a week, or if you train 4 times a week, you have a lot more leniency there to touch on specific qualities throughout the session, right? So you could go lower, upper, lower, upper. You could go on a 3-day split. You could go lower, upper, full body. You could go on a 2-day split, 2 full body days. That way you're touching on body parts twice a week. You might do a horizontal push one day. You might do a vertical push on the other day on the full body day. You might do a vertical pull versus a horizontal pull. So you're getting balance throughout the week.
I've got one more question for you before I get you back to that family. It's just more personal. I know just from getting to know you in the last 2 hours or so and just seeing you online, you're busy, right? I know you have 2 kiddos. I know you do in-person training. I know you're super consistent, putting out amazing quality content. You've got all these things. You're running a business. You're trying to be, there for your family. How do you keep it all together, man? I always love talking to people in a similar season as me, trying to balance everything and just kind of hear how they keep going.
Reality is I don't keep it all together. Um, some days I'm just hanging on by a thread, and some days I don't get the stuff done, but I'm learning that if you want to grow, you're going to have to delegate tasks. You're going to have to
Yeah.
hire people to some degree. So with me, one thing I found, I struggle focusing on one task at a time. I don't know if it's
Mm,
ADHD. So my wife's really good at focusing on one task. I'm not. Um, I found that writing out what you need to do in a day and delegating a particular time frame to that task. So if you go, okay, for example, I look at 500 videos a week of movement with my online
mm,
clients. And I'm like, okay, I have X amount of clients I need to service. If I don't get on top of these check-ins every day, they're going to pile up, and I'm not going to be give the clients the feedback that they want in a particular time frame. So I need to delegate an hour and a half, 90 minutes to giving feedback. That's one thing, and I'm like, I need that 90-minute window, and that's a priority for me.
yeah.
So I have to slide that in my day on top of training, on top of school pickup, on top of, you know what I mean? So you've got to find, what do you need to do on a daily basis that are non-negotiables in order for your business to run? And
Yeah.
for me, that is social media. I need to get into a creative headspace. I need to train myself, right, as a high priority.
Hmm.
I need to be able to give time for check-ins and get back
Hmm.
to clients. That is the bare minimum in my day. And that bare minimum is 6 hours of work.
Mm,
So anything
right.
above that, right? If I want to film a YouTube video, if I want to create a new program, or if I want to look at, improving my systems and working on perhaps even upskilling myself, learning a new course or reading a book, that's all that comes after the 6 hours.
Mm. So you're putting first things first, and then you're
It's
time
the
blocking
same
around it.
it's the same thing in your training program. The principles align everywhere in your life.
Love it.
What is the highest priority? What are the non-negotiables? And how do I get them done first? So get the big frogs out of the way first.
Yeah. Although that's useful advice in and outside of training, to your point, for anyone just trying to be efficient so that you're basically preserving the time for what matters most, which for you and I can tell from knowing you for a little bit, it's family, right? And building that relationship. Um, Steve, man, for any of my listeners or viewers that would love to find you, learn from you, follow you, perhaps jump into a coaching program, where would you direct them?
Okay, so Instagram is the best place to find me. It is coach underscore Steven with a V underscore Sahyoun. You'll see my name in the show notes. It's a hard one to
Yep.
spell, but I'm on Instagram. And if you want to book in for a consultation, there we have a free process where you can book in for a discovery call. Through the links in my bio, you'll see all our online programs there, and you'll see some of our free resources that you can obviously use for anything that you're struggling with, say spine or shoulder related injuries.
Awesome. Yeah, and as Steve mentioned, I always put my guest links top and center so people can find them and follow them. Dude, it's been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you joining, Steve. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on, mate. Thank you.
All right, everybody. That is it for my conversation with Coach Steve Sahyoun. How about that guy? Is that not a guy that you just want to hang out with, right? Just so cool, so smart. He's just got so much to offer. Just a great guy. I really enjoyed the conversation with him. I hope you took something from it. My top takeaways from the episode, I'm just going to revisit those 6 qualities that he talked about that we should be thinking about layering into our training. The first one is being elastic, focusing on being flexible. The second one, maximum strength. The third one, relative strength, right? Our strength relative to our body weight. The fourth one, rate of force development. How fast can we move a load? How much power do we have? The fifth one, mobility. And the sixth one, rotational power. And I think something that I'm going to immediately apply in my own training is to layer some of those concepts into my training, right? Focusing on jumping when I'm doing lower body day, focusing on power cleans, whether that's a dumbbell or barbell or something else, maybe when I'm focusing on my pull day, right? But he made it sound approachable, and it sounds like you can take these principles and layer them into what you're already doing, assuming you're doing something, and not have to kind of reinvent the wheel with your training. So love that conversation. I'm linking to all of his stuff in the episode show notes. I hope you check it out, and I hope you find Steve and learn from him and maybe even get engaged with him. And then, I have to ask, right? If you're still here and you're listening to my voice right now, you have your phone or something nearby, if you can just move your thumbs around a little bit more and find that rating button. And if you like the show, maybe if you didn't like it, if you can help me out, leave a 5-star rating. If you have something to share, even if it's a, hey, great stuff, or maybe even, hey, not so great stuff, leave a comment. If you have a question, you can leave a comment and review and wherever you're finding this podcast. And I always like to offer, we monitor our email. So we have contact@strongerweekly.com. That's contact@strongerweekly.com. If you got a suggestion for the show, if there's a guest you think we should bring on, if you have a question you want to ask us, please do that. We monitor that email address and love to hear from our fans and our listeners. So thank you so much for joining the Stronger Weekly podcast. Hope you have a great week, and we hoped we helped you grow stronger this week. We'll see you next time.